Alright, so move on to the next segment. I'll be sharing my fight summary on the fight that took place on the UFC 300 card between Justin Gathje and Max Holloway. So, we seen one hell of a fight take place last night in the lightweight division on the undercard of the UFC 300 pay-per-view card. So we seen Max Holloway become the brand new BMF world champion, defeating Justin Gathje by knockout in the 5th round to become the new BMF world champion in the UFC. So my fight summary on this fight. Man, oh man. Max Holloway has earned the right to become the BMF champion. He has earned the right to be the baddest motherfucker to have that world title in the UFC, because he had a masterclass performance against Justin Gathje last night on the UFC 300 pay-per-view card. He defined the odds. He was moving up for the featherweight division and moved up to the lightweight division to fight a caliber fighter, Justin Gathje, the best version of Justin Gathje that we have seen in his UFC career thus far. He went up there and put up a masterclass performance. I scored the fight 4-1. It was a clear shutout in favor of Max Holloway. But the final 10 seconds of that fight, Max Holloway, that sequence between Max Holloway and Justin Gathje will never be forgotten. Max Holloway says, stand in the middle of this octagon for the last 10 seconds. We're going to go all in. We're going to go to war. And we're going to give everything we got for the final 10 seconds of that fight. And man, Max Holloway knocked out Justin Gathje in the middle of that octagon with 1 second remaining on the clock in the 5th round of that BMF championship fight. But Max Holloway used his striking abilities. He used his footwork. He used his striking abilities. He used his MMA IQ to defeat Justin Gathje in a performance that we will never forget in Max Holloway's illustrious UFC career. It has to be in the conversation for one of the best lightweight performances in UFC history. That's how picture perfect Max Holloway's performance was last night in the octagon against Justin Gathje. But looking at this fight for the 5 rounds that we saw, it was really entertaining. Hats off to Justin Gathje giving everything he had, but it happens like this in sports. One day, the better guy, the better team is going to be better than you. And that's what happened last night when Max Holloway defeated Justin Gathje. And man, for those 5 rounds, I just still shocked of the performance that Max Holloway gave us. But Max Holloway really set the tone of this fight early on in the final seconds of the 1st round, where he landed that roundhouse kick to Justin Gathje right on the button, right on his nose, cracked Justin Gaethje's nose. I believe he broke his nose early on in that fight. I'm not making any excuses for Justin Gathje, but you guys know in any sport, or if you're doing any physical activity, you only breathe from the mouth, you only breathe from the nose. And when you're fighting in an MMA fight for 5 rounds, 5 rounds remaining, 4 or 5 rounds remaining, you do the math on it, that's 20 minutes fighting a caliber fighter. And Max Holloway with a broken nose, really only one way to breathe. That's hell on earth in that octagon. So I'm not making any excuses for Justin Gaethje, because it was one hell of a performance for Max Holloway. Hey, that's how you make an impression. That's how you prove on a grand stage like UFC 300 why you are the baddest motherfucker. And that's why that BMF title is always going to mean something. But Max Holloway is the right person to hold that respective title at this moment. So, what's next for Max Holloway? Now, after Max Holloway does have a lot of options after this fight, but one of the fights that are off the table now was a future fight with Islam Makhachev for the lightweight championship, because that's how great Max Holloway performed last night. But he still has a lot of options. But I do believe it makes a lot of sense for Max Holloway to move back down to the featherweight division, a division that he is one of the greatest champions in UFC history at. And I do believe that he deserves a featherweight championship fight against Ilia Topuria next in the calendar year 2024. And you can have this matchup makes a lot of sense because Max Holloway just had one of the greatest performances in UFC history. Max Holloway is one of the greatest featherweight champions in UFC history. He made that championship. He brought a lot of prestige and honor to that featherweight championship. And then you have the new king, the new kid on the block, Ilia Topuria, who just dethroned one of, if not the greatest featherweight champion, and Alexander Volkanovski earlier this year to become the featherweight champion. So it makes a lot of sense for these two guys to fight next. And I think in the later part of 2024, it would make sense for these two the main event and headline a UFC pay-per-view card, be the main event of that UFC pay-per-view card. And that fight should take place in Spain. Now, I do believe that fight would do wonders over there in the country of Spain, between Max Holloway and Ilia Topuria, a fight that would do numbers, a fight that we will all remember in the featherweight division, could go down as one of the greatest featherweight fights in UFC history. So sign me up for that. I do believe that fight makes a lot of sense based off on what Max Holloway did last night. Being the new BMF world champion, he has a lot of options, and if he's not going to get the lightweight championship fight, because that has already been assigned to Dustin Poirier in the near future, give him the next opportunity, the featherweight championship, because there is no clear #1 contender for that title as we speak today. So, with that being said, what's next for Justin Gathje? Now, I personally thought that Justin Gathje would be the weight bully in this fight, and I thought he would beat Max Holloway by decision in this fight. But that did not happen, and Max Holloway made me eat my words. But it's not the end of the world for Justin Gathje losing this fight. And does it hurt his title chances? Yes, because like I just said a few moments ago, he is now not next in line for the lightweight title. If he was successful last night, he might have been. But Dustin Poirier is now next in line for Islam Makhachev. So it did hurt his title chances a little bit. He's never won the lightweight championship in his respective UFC career. He won the interim title and obviously was the former BMF title, but world champion. But I think he still has a lot of options in the lightweight division. The lightweight division is one of the most stacked divisions in the UFC today. So I think it would make a lot of sense for him to fight Charles Oliveira next. And they've already fought in the past, but I think right now how the lightweight division is stacking up, Charles Oliveira was just unsuccessful against Arman Tsarukyan last night. And Justin Gathje was unsuccessful against Max Holloway last night. So I think that would make a lot of sense for those two guys to fight in a lightweight rematch to see where the chips stack in the lightweight division moving forward. But those are my thoughts on that fight summary. So I'll be sharing my overall thoughts on the UFC 300 pay-per-view card. Overall, the UFC 300 pay-per-view card lived up to the hype and lived up to my own personal expectations. This was everything you wanted as a combat sports fan, and especially a fan of MMA inside the UFC world. I woke up this morning wanting to have more MMA fights to watch, wanting to watch more violence to watch. That's how remarkable the UFC 300 pay-per-view card was last night. The moments that stood out to me last night was the Max Holloway and the Justin Gathje fight, the Yuri Prochazka knockout, his performance that he had on the UFC 300 premium card, the Alex Pereira knockout against Jamal Hill in the first round of that fight, light heavyweight championship fight, the Charles Oliveira and Arman Tsarukyan fight during the 300 pay-per-view card was an honorable mention as well. So to me, this was everything they wanted. This was the best that the UFC 300 pay-per-view card could have given us. And I think Dana White and the UFC executives have something to be proud of from this UFC pay-per-view card. Definitely, I'm happy. The MMA community, for the most part, looks like they're happy about this. Let's get more pay-per-view cards like this in the calendar year of 2024. But those are my thoughts on the Justin Gathje versus Max Holloway fight. And those are my thoughts on the overall 300 pay-per-view card fight.